The storm had torn through the Texas plains like a beast let loose from the heavens, ripping fences, flattening barns, and washing away everything that dared to stand tall. When the sun finally rose the next morning, its weak light fell upon a scene of quiet devastation. The land was soaked, the soil black and heavy with rain, and the scent of wet timber and broken dreams filled the air. In the heart of the wreckage stood Earl and Martha Green, an old couple whose lives were stitched into this land. They had built their little ranch with their own hands half a century ago, raised children here, buried loved ones under the oak tree near the river, and weathered every hardship nature had hurled at them. But this one had struck deeper than the others. Their barn lay in pieces, their roof had caved in, and half their cattle were gone. Yet there they stood, shoulder to shoulder, trying to rebuild it all from scratch. Martha's frail hands clutched a rusted hammer, and Earl's back strained as he lifted a half-broken beam. They didn't speak much, only exchanged glances that said, "We've made it through worse, and we'll make it again." Up on the ridge above their ranch, a horseman watched in silence. His name was Colton Hayes, a man known across Texas as the Millionaire Cowboy. He had made his fortune in land, cattle, and oil, yet despite his wealth, there was something about him that still belonged to the dust. The saddle and the sweat, he was a man of few words and quiet actions. But as he looked down at that couple struggling among the ruins, something inside him shifted. He remembered a day long ago, when his own father's ranch had burned to the ground. He had been a boy then, helpless, watching the flames consume everything his family owned. They had received no help, only pity from those who passed by. His father's pride refused charity, and his mother had cried silently in the dark. That memory never left Colton. It became the fire that drove him to succeed, to make sure no one he loved ever suffered like that again. And now, watching the Greens, that same fire burned again, not for revenge but for redemption. Colton rode down the muddy slope, his chestnut horse splashing through puddles, its hooves echoing in the still air. Earl looked up, his shovel paused mid-swing. Martha straightened, wary but curious. "Morning," Colton said, tipping his hat politely. "Morning," Earl replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "You looking for someone?" "Just riding through," Colton said. "Checking on the folks after the storm." His eyes scanned the broken barn, the collapsed roof, the scattered tools. "Looks like you got hit bad." Martha nodded, trying to smile despite the exhaustion lining her face. "Lost the barn, lost most of our feed, and 2 heifers didn't make it through the night. But we'll manage. We always do." Colton dismounted, his boots sinking into the wet soil. "You folks got anyone to help you?" he asked. Earl shook his head slowly. "Kids are grown and gone. Neighbors got their own problems. It's just us now." His voice cracked slightly and he quickly looked away. Colton nodded silently. He could see the pride in Earl's eyes, the same pride his father had carried to his grave. Martha stepped forward. "We don't need charity, mister. We've gotten by on our own this long." "Ma'am," Colton said gently, "sometimes the strongest folks are the ones who know when to let someone lend a hand." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small flask and a wrapped bundle of food. "Here," he said, handing it over. "You've worked enough for one day. Take a rest." Martha hesitated, then accepted, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Colton leaned against a broken post and looked out across the wreckage. "You've done more rebuilding today than most folks would do in a week," he said. "But this—" He looked around. "This isn't work 2 people your age should be doing alone." Earl frowned, his jaw tightening. "We can't just stop. The roof won't fix itself." Colton stepped closer, his voice deep and calm. "Then let me give you some advice," he said. "All stop now." The words hung in the air like thunder. Martha blinked in confusion. "Stop?" she asked softly. "You heard me," Colton said firmly. "All stop now. Put down the tools. No more lifting, no more fixing today." Earl's eyes narrowed. "Son, we don't have time to stop. The storm don't care if we rest or not." Colton took off his hat and looked the old man dead in the eye. "You've done enough for today. Tomorrow things'll change, but tonight you rest." He turned toward his horse, tightening the reins. "You folks have my word," he said over his shoulder. "Tomorrow morning you won't be alone." Earl looked puzzled. "You talk like a man who plans to come back." Elton smiled faintly beneath his hat brim. "I don't make promises I don't keep." And with that, He mounted his horse and rode off toward the horizon. The sun was setting behind him, painting the valley gold and crimson, and for the first time since the storm, Martha felt something stir in her chest, unhope. She turned to Earl, her voice trembling. "Do you think he meant it?" Earl looked after the fading figure on horseback and nodded slowly. He didn't sound like a man who's used to breaking his word. That night, as the cold crept in and the stars began to shimmer above the dark plains, Earl and Martha sat beside the flickering fire in what was left of their kitchen. The walls groaned in the wind, and the world outside was silent except for the distant cry of coyotes. Yet somehow they felt less alone. Out there, somewhere in the night, a stranger had ridden away with purpose in his heart. They didn't know his name. They didn't know who he was. But his words, "All stop now," echoed like a promise from heaven. Far away, Colton rode hard across the open fields toward his own ranch. His mind was made up. He reached his gate past midnight, the stars glinting off the metal rails. His foreman, Sam Tucker, stood half asleep by the stable. "Boss," he called. "That you?" Colton swung down, tying his horse. "Get some coffee brewing, Sam," he said. "We're gonna need it." "At this hour?" "What for?" "We're riding out at dawn," Colton said, his tone unshakable. "Get the men, the trucks, the tools, and every spare board we got. There's a couple down in Silver Creek who need a new roof. And a reason to believe good folks still exist." Sam stared, then nodded slowly. "You got it." "Boss?" Colton glanced out toward the horizon where lightning still flickered faintly beyond the hills. "Storm's over," he murmured. "But it's time to rebuild more than just a house." He turned toward the barn, the moonlight casting his shadow long across the ground. Inside him burned the same restless spirit that had once built an empire out of dust. But this time it wasn't about money or land. It was about doing right. By the kind of people who built the world with their bare hands and never once asked for thanks. And as the first light of dawn crept over the valley, the millionaire cowboy saddled up once more, ready to keep a promise made to two strangers and to himself. Morning rose over Silver Creek. Valley like a second chance. The storm clouds were gone, leaving behind a clean, sharp sky that glowed with the pale gold of new beginnings. The air smelled of wet earth and hope. Earl and Martha. Green stirred awake to the soft rumble of something unfamiliar. Engines. The sound grew louder until it filled the valley. Breaking the usual morning silence, Earl stepped outside, shading his eyes against the rising sun, and what he saw made his heart stumble in his chest. Coming down the dirt road were 3 trucks packed with lumber, tools, barrels of nails, and food supplies. Behind the convoy rode a group of ranch hands on horseback, and at the front, guiding them like a general leading an army, was Colton Hayes, the same cowboy who had told them to stop working the night before. The millionaire cowboy had returned, and this time, he hadn't come alone. Colton pulled his horse to a stop in front of the broken house, dismounting with quiet confidence. "Morning, Mr. Green," he said, tipping his hat. "I told you I'd be back." Earl's jaw slackened as he looked at the loaded trucks, and the men jumping down, ready to work. "Good Lord, son," he whispered. "You really meant it." Martha came to the doorway, her apron still on, tears already welling up. "What is all this?" she asked. Colton smiled gently. "This," he said, spreading his arms, "is a rebuild. You two have done your part. Now let us do ours." Before Earl could protest, the men had already started unloading. They worked like a well-trained team, setting up saws, laying out beams, and marking foundation lines. Colton gave instructions like a foreman, his deep voice calm but commanding. He didn't stand aside watching. He worked right there with them. He lifted planks, hammered nails, and wiped sweat from his brow like any other hand. He wasn't the kind of rich man who gave orders from a chair. He believed help only meant something if your own hands were dirty. Martha brought water for the workers, her hands shaking with gratitude, while Earl stood speechless, watching the chaos of kindness unfold before him. By midday, the sound of hammers and laughter filled the valley. The barn's frame began to rise again, stronger than before. The old fences were torn down and replaced. The roof of the cabin was stripped and rebuilt with new timber, and the walls stood tall and proud under the Texas sun. It wasn't just a reconstruction of wood and nails. It was a rebuilding of faith. For every nail that went in, every board that stood upright, a little piece of the couple's broken hope mended itself. Colton worked beside them, sweat dripping down his neck, dust caking his boots. When Martha tried to thank him again, he only smiled and said, "Don't thank me, ma'am. Just promise me you'll rest a little when this is all done." As the sun began to dip low, the ranch looked almost alive again. Smoke curled gently from a repaired chimney. The barn stood proud with fresh red paint, and the pasture fence gleamed white against the horizon. The men finished their work just as the sky turned orange and purple. Colton gathered them around the porch where Earl and Martha stood hand in hand. "Folks," Colton began, "today ain't about money or favors. It's about respect. These two here built this land with their blood and years. All we did was remind it how to stand tall again." His words carried over the wind, low and strong, and not a soul spoke until he was done. Earl stepped forward, his voice trembling. "I don't know what to say, son. You and these men, you've done what I thought was impossible. You gave us back our home." He paused, his eyes shining. "I've lived a long time, and I've seen storms tear down more than just wood. But today, you proved there's still good left in this world." Colton nodded respectfully. "You earned every bit of it. Mr. Green, you didn't ask for help, and that's why you deserved it more than anyone." Martha approached, holding a small wooden box in her frail hands. She opened it carefully and took out an old, tarnished horseshoe polished smooth from years of handling. "This belonged to my father," she said softly. "It's brought us luck all our lives. But I think it belongs to you now." She handed it to Colton. He looked down at it, his throat tightening. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I reckon luck found its way here long before I did." He took off his hat and bowed his head. That evening, when the workers left and the valley grew quiet again, Colton stayed behind. The stars blinked over the plains, the air cool and still. He and Earl sat on the new porch steps, watching the fireflies drift through the dusk. "You know," Earl said after a long silence, "I didn't believe you at first. When you said all stop now, I figured you were just another man passing through, saying nice words to make us feel better." Colton smiled faintly. "I don't talk much, Mr. Green, but when I do, I aim to mean it." Earl chuckled, then grew quiet again. "You ever lose something like this? Something that took years to build?" Colton's eyes drifted toward the horizon. "I did," he said softly. "Lost everything once. My folks, our ranch, our hope. No one came for us back then. I guess that's why I ride the way I do now. I can't stop storms, but I can help clean up what's left." Earl nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "You done more than clean up, son. You gave two old hearts a reason to believe again." When the night deepened, Colton stood pulling on his gloves. "I better head out," he said. "Got more land to check before morning." Martha came to the doorway, her silhouette framed by the golden light from inside. "You'll come back, won't you?" she asked softly. Colton smiled under his hat. "Count on it, ma'am. Next time I'll bring pie." He mounted his horse, the leather creaking, the animal snorting softly in the dark. As he turned to leave, the moonlight caught his face, and for a brief moment it looked like the ghosts of the past had finally let him go. As his horse trotted off toward the hills, the Greens watched until he vanished into the night. The ranch around them was silent but alive, a place reborn. Martha leaned into Earl's shoulder, whispering, "I told you he meant it." Earl smiled, his arm wrapping around her. "Yeah, darling. Some folks talk about faith. Others write in and prove it." Out on the ridge, Colton paused to look back one last time. The ranch lights glowed warm against the darkness, and he felt something deep in his chest and the kind of peace money could never buy. The storm had taken so much from this land, but it had also given him something he hadn't realized he was missing: purpose.